Now, legend has it that in the early 2010s, a dynamic hybridized group of young, savvy, black, creative youth from different parts of the country, some from KZN, some from Johannesburg proper, made a brew in the Gauteng inner city, which eventually became known as the mythological Poison Bugs, creating then something which was a bit of a creative upsurge that kind of flattened typical South African fashion. They introduced a new generation to this open-ended, Americanized basketball fashion, hip-hop culture infused, fashionista centered, Italian, global, European connected sense of being. Basically, they were like South Africa's introduction into the world of hypebeast fashion. And they were also leaders of the new school, literally, generally, quite culturally, as to speak. This group consisted out of most famously Malum Cool Cat, Stilo Makolide, Scoop Makatini. It also consisted out of members which were a bit low-key but had their own sense of cult fervor in the streets. People like Mkefra, shout out to Pubesi. I mean, the list goes on, and including the member who I'm about to mention now. Also, peace to the late Ricky Rick. He became a part of that formidable unit as well. But I want to talk about a member of that crew who tended to kind of slip into the darkness occasionally, especially when it came to the musical craft. Somebody who kind of released their own bodies of work a little bit recent into the era. I mean, I think 2019 was when he put out Gangula, and gave us a taste of what he could do as a solo act. I'm talking about none other than uSanele. So, for those who never got the existential presence nor the introduction of being there when Boys and Bucks was dominating, much of what we see, feel, and hear today in the midst of our 2000 can be directly attributed to the Boys and Bucks movement in terms of their cultural impact. Matter of fact, we've been devising and plotting on a Boys and Bucks episode for eons. And I think this review reminds me that it's definitely a cultural phenomena that needs to be critically analyzed, spoken about, admired, acknowledged, and appreciated in terms of South African pop cultural legacy. But uSanele gives us another project, iGhost, uSanele Ghost to be proper about it. And the one thing which kept ringing and dawning on me as I listened to this project was how dangerous it is when the idols find themselves still trying to catch up to the youth that they influenced. I mean, there comes a time when the influencers naturally fade out. The age, the moment of maturity, just the place that they are in life becomes radically different from the younger people who they subsequently influenced. And whether or not they want this to happen, it does. It's a matter of just biological life and time. But it grotesquely feels very disingenuous when people who influenced following generations just can't seem to engage with the conclusive outcome of what their legacy was, and as a result it feels like they're still living the question of what their legacy is in a generation that can't answer it for them because they're too busy worshipping them. And that's what I feel with this project. uSanele has always been as suave as the rest of Boys and Bucks, with a low-tone register voice, a little bit of like an open drawl and kind of high-pitched sense of spunkiness. He delivers a minimalistic street sound which has all you'd want from the balance of cool kid meets relatable in the broader South African context. This we know. What I found often difficult and quite honestly disturbing to listen to was this trajectory that I feel he has been going into of embedding himself in a sound that he doesn't really naturally fit into. uSanele iGhost is a project I would call mature trap. It's literally a mature man trying to do trap. Does he succeed? In many ways he does. Because millennials come from an era where writing lyrics was a part of the fundamental feature of pop culture in the scope. So as a result, he brings this kind of reflectional aspect into his songs. There is a ruminating on age, on time, on defeat, on the ins and outs of the game, on being regarded as a legend when the status itself doesn't really resound to anything that would impact your survival comfortably. There is the harsh reality that a lot of the times notoriety doesn't always equal sustainability. And I think in the case of uSanele, it pretty much is that. When you're looked at as somebody who has been a cultural architect, many expect you to, at this point, be living the life that reflects that kind of an influential resonance. But South Africa tends to have this very sad echoing where a lot of the people who really influence the culture are not, rewarded by it in a monetary sense. They simply remain legends and myths whose air is spoken of like uNogwaja or any other mythical tale, Sibali. And I think the modern day folklore heroes of our time are that. They've become tantamount to regular ass niggas living lives which are as much of a struggle as the next day and the other person, when their hype far outweighs the next person. And I think this probably hurts a little bit more. Because it's one thing to be regular and poor, but it's another to be regular and famous. Because when you're regular and famous, your fame haunts you. Your legacy haunts you. And it must be agonizing if you choose to take it seriously. And I think this is the place in life that uSanele is at. He reflects a lot on what feels like the somberness of having to find what to do with yourself when you realize that a lot of the cultural aptitude that you were about hasn't yet manifested on the level of big bucks. So here he is, relatively stable, still trying to tell his story, even as a quote-unquote legend. So the lyricism on this project is incredibly intimate. I appreciated how he goes into every dynamic of his soul, from the intro, from what feels like and from what we get is his little niece just kind of motivating her uncle to keep on moving, to the sounds of a youthful scope and how he brings in all of his homies and cronies and friends into a moment where, yes, he's celebrating how far he's come, but he's also reflecting on what it means to just be a legend in the street, a local legend, so to speak. And the sound scope just doesn't match that, because again, Boys and Bugs are a 2010s ensemble, and a lot of what was popping back then can't really be said to be trap proper in the way that we know it today. And I think this is something I shared with Malum Coolcat's recent work as well, is that there is a sense of trying to move with the wave of today's generation when they aren't really gliding as easily as they used to with the more electro, techno, kwaito influenced production that they were experimental on as Boys and Bugs. Emphasis on experimental is this experimentalism which kind of established Boys and Bugs' lurking underworld persona into this burgeoning pop culture movement. So I think when they easily incline themselves to today's practically whitewashed, commercialized and factory ready trap, it feels extremely disingenuous. So that's the cultural end of the critique. I want to go into the actual music. So there are songs in here. Ikaka See the Wave with Malum Coolcat. There is Sandle Senkosi, there is a track like Back to Josie. And I think what these songs do is that they anchor this project with a sense of softly paleted flamboyance. This project is not in a rush. It's not trying to pander to the clubs, but it is definitely trying to pander to the youth. It's trying to be the kind of project that can be played in street festivals, that can be appreciated in the midst of the culture as it happens. The production is fascinating enough. Tracks like Ichambile have this kind of sparse, open-ended, yet kind of sharp-toned drum pattern to them, but it's real typical. Like it's what everybody's doing. And there are elements of it feeling a little bit more slower. The tempo is kind of on old guy steez, because this is where uSanele is. He's a hot man, and as a hot man, he speaks from a steed that can't go as fast and as snappy as a blackie. So as a result, this project is a little bit more steadier, and as a result, I don't really think younger people, except those who are fans of the Boys and Bucks cult following, will resonate with this longer than its kind of stationed moment. I don't think there's a single song here which takes us further than this confessional tapestry that Sanele is woven to us by kind of screaming out the question of his own pride and glory, and asking us what must happen when your legends are just like you, when you realize that your legends are just like you, and probably even worse, where their pockets, their budget, their existential life crisis match up to yours. I think this is also a reflection of the fact that South Africa is a country which pretends to have a glitz and glam Hollywood-esque industry, but really our cultural industry and our art sector aren't really pumped with enough money and inaccessibility for us to really have celebrities. Yes, we have public figures, famous people, but the fame here really is edgy. I mean, you could see somebody who's won hundreds of SAMA awards eating at the same restaurant that you do. This isn't the kind of fame that we see from the big mass marketed American style, and yet we try to give the impression that it is. And this does an injustice to the real people who are famous, because now they have to live up to some kind of manufactured aura that doesn't exist. And I think it's themes like these that this project addresses, albeit very subtly. So ultimately, for me, this project is really more or less a breach out of the regular. I'd give it a 6 out of 10 at the very most, because again, it's the dawning of an interesting sound, a mature trap. And I think this mature trap would feel way more revolutionary if it spoke on its own terms and tried to create a soundscope which just wasn't so safe. And that's my essential issue with this project. The beats are too safe for somebody as risque as uSanele. So it feels like a juxtaposition which doesn't gel together in ways that are cohesive at the very most. Ultimately, my last note on this is a lot of South African legends seem to be crawling in the woodwork and almost asking the youth where to go. And this saddens me, because we come from a country where one of the cultural sayings is "Inyathi buzwa kwabaphambili," a country that respects its elders, that understands the importance of having elders. And I think our legends are reluctant to become elders, because they think in being older, it means being outdated. Yes, there's an element to that, but it also means being classical. It also means aging in a way where the most important things are distilled through you. And I think a lot of the members of Boys and Bucks and other legends, in this resistance to elderhood, to hotmanship, are doing themselves a massive disservice to the beauty of their own aging process. Khulani majita, ni kokobe, ni kuke. It's beautiful. I know we also say Guko Tandayo, but the thing is, it isn't a choice like that. It really isn't. So Guga, whether you like it or not, and Guga shouldn't be seen as decaying in the forgotten annals of memory. Rather, what Guga is pruning and maturing into something that can become the vestige for the youth to always feed on. And I'm not just being poetic, I'm being very real about this. We need elders. We need people who are ready to just turn and give the youth a sense of dialogue. Not to like kind of talk down on the youth, but to understand that youth to elderhood is a cycle. And even as an elder, parts of you remain forever young, and you will need to learn from those after you. So before I rant on about being old, I think this project could have benefited way more if the artists felt like they were embracing their maturity. Talking about maturity, the Headspace as a channel keeps maturing and maturing, and if you don't know who we are, check out the episodes we've been doing on culture in the African continent, and we sometimes choose to kind of dish in on the global side of things when it seems as if the message has a direct translation to where we are as a continent. So in case you didn't know who we are Africa's most poignant culture channel. My name is VJ, the brother from the ancient mother. I work alongside the brother Oda Keza and Fritz Croyd, and that's why it's Headspace with a 3. 2024 has opened up, and I really hope we can have these further dialogues on what the culture means. If you haven't subscribed and you're not sure, trust me, you should, because there's a lot that I think you'd appreciate. Peace.